It is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 61 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. Last week I was in Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, and you will have heard that episode where I was very interested in feeling the energy that I think still exists in Rendlesham Forest as a result of the very famous incident in 1980, December 1980, when it was alleged by a number of United States Air Force people who were posted at a very important Cold War Air Force base called Bentwaters, named after, I think, a couple of cottages that exist just on the edge. And if you see the Bentwaters base near the trail that eventually leads to where the UFO was sighted, right at the beginning of that trail off the road is one of the cottages, and it's still there, and a man lives there, and I saw him with selling his chickens and his goose eggs. I didn't bother him, I didn't ask him. I'm sure everybody asks him about the UFOs, and maybe he and his family have been living there since it all happened. But it's very, very empty and very rural, and a rather surprising place you would have thought for extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional people to make themselves known, or maybe it was an accident. Whatever, I enjoyed that very much. I'm back in Cologne, Germany now, and I had a lot of things coming into my head in the last week, mainly about the visit to Rendlesham, and what that meant, and perhaps exactly who were these interdimensional beings. There is so much, as you know, that we've said before in previous episodes about visitations. But also in some of the early episodes, not that early actually, quite recent episodes, it came to me through various sources and also through my talking to people, that these were a little bit more complicated perhaps than out of this planet people coming to visit. It would be perhaps better to assume that some of them obviously do come from vast distances, and obviously do come from other star systems. But a good deal of what are being seen as UFOs or UAPs probably come from our own planet. And that's not just because the governments have been able to back-engineer, re-engineer, downed extraterrestrial interdimensional craft, and have had 50, 60 years of chances to do that through the mighty industrial complex of these companies like Boeing and whoever, who work on all sorts of projects for governments, particularly the United States government, on designing new forms of propulsion and flight, and loads of other companies that design all sorts of things based on technologies that we don't really even know about now, which could be just legitimate earthbound technologies, or at some point in the past crashed UAPs, if you'll go with me on that, with whatever they had on board, were disseminated amongst companies under secret license in order to be able to decide whether there was technology that could be used. Mostly, sadly, these technologies are always used for defense or offense, as the case may be. But it's also been alleged in all this UFO lore and all the stuff that's been written that our own governments have obviously been designing their own craft, and what you see sometimes are experimental craft. And of course, that was a big thing probably in the 90s when people alleged that, I think it was the TR-3B, which was like a triangular craft that a lot of people were seeing. They said that was an extraterrestrial or a UFO, but it might well have turned out to have been a secret triangular craft with probably very conventional propulsion, but a different form of levitation, maybe an anti-magnetic ability, and able to repel Earth's gravity. These were being perhaps tested all over the world, and people were citing those. Again, I have no first-hand knowledge of that. I've just read about it. But it's an interesting thought. So all of this is great, but ultimately, who are the people who are flying these vehicles, or what are they doing with these vehicles? And have they had communication with governments? Were these craft gifted? Were they some form of technological exchange in return for something back? And of course, if you really want to go into the detail about what a lot of UFO people and conspiracy theorists think, you don't have to go very far into the internet. And there's just so much stuff out there on YouTube and or podcasts devoted to this. And just in summary, there is a belief, of course, that a lot of these sightings that are not man-made are either being species that exist on Earth already or underneath Earth in great big caverns, or they just come through interdimensionally, so we can only see them when they make themselves known, because otherwise we can't see that dimension. So it could be that, or it could be indeed visitors from other star systems. But that seems to be, given the huge distances involved, relatively unlikely, unless, of course, they've designed some form of drive that obviously is completely different from all of our conventional physics, and they could massively travel faster than the speed of light through time folding or whatever they might be able to do. But that's not really my interest today. My interest today was when I was sitting there in Rendlesham Forest, sitting on top of the statue of a interdimensional craft that somebody's put there. I had that very strong feeling that the beings in question were there perhaps as scientists or perhaps as observers, and were either collecting things or maybe even they were spying on the Rendlesham Forest Air Force Base at Bentwaters, as seems to be the case now with an awful lot of sightings that have happened of these lights, these UAPs, over military bases, usually bases that may have some sort of nuclear weapon connotation. But historically, ever since the Roswell days, the 1945s, 46s onwards through the 50s, and what the whistleblowers that are coming out now are saying, that they were hovering over nuclear weapons silos, rocket silos, and even shutting them down from action, or setting them all into an advanced state of readiness, which panicked everybody and then suddenly switched them all off, as if to show that they had the capacity to do what they want. So don't push the button because we can stop it. And there have been accounts in the 60s where during the test firing of various missiles, UFOs or UAPs were tagging along. And there is a huge history that's coming out now with the disclosure from retired or near-death military people who feel they're safe to talk about it, that throughout the testing of all these weapons or aircraft, they had visitations from UFOs flying with them. They called them tag-alongs, and pilots were very used to seeing them in the skies. And I think a couple of years ago, you saw some of these videos coming through finally, I think the Tic Tac video, which we've talked about, where pilots were actively seeing these UAP orbs flying with them, and somehow either keeping an eye on them or playing games with them. I don't know what they were doing. But there's a huge, long history of Air Force and Navy people seeing UFOs, UAPs, and for them to be watched by them. So what exactly is that going to contribute, that knowledge going to contribute to what happened to me last Thursday in Rendlesham Forest? Well, shortly afterwards, I started having dreams and feelings that I was being contacted, perhaps by some beings that had something to do with the Rendlesham Forest incident, and thoughts were definitely being put into my mind. And as always seems to happen for the year or so that I've been doing this podcast, something leads me to something. A dot gets connected to another dot, and it's almost as if this is quite deliberate. It's nothing by accident. the first thing that came about was suddenly on my computer, almost without searching, I suddenly read about a chap who lives, I think, in Norway, and he had a visitation from an alien being, if you like, and this guy sat down with this alien being who described herself as a reptilian, a lady reptilian called Lacerta. Well, that wasn't her real name. She had a name that was unpronounceable by the human mouth, but she wanted you to be calling her Lacerta. And she sat down with him for quite a few hours, I believe, and there was a question and answer session. Now, you kind of can easily dismiss this because there is so much talk, again, by conspiracy theorists, of course, the biggest being David Icke, who back in the 70s, well, no, probably back in the 80s and the 90s, he was very famous for writing all sorts of books alleging that the whole of human society is allegedly under the control of a reptilian species, the Archons, I think he called them. And he's made a considerable amount of money, over 20 million, I think he's worth now, from writing books, giving massive football stadium-sized chats and talks, Wembley Stadium, going around the world, talking about his theories and his research, how that the New World Order, which is a part of a secret government that has been basically running the world since time immemorial, way before even the Egyptians, and are in the control of these lizard-like creatures that are highly intelligent and can have the ability to cloak themselves so they can actually convince you through your mind that they look human. And he is obviously very convinced that they walk amongst us. And he has some very fantastical claims, like the British royal family or various members of the British establishment were in fact lizards, were in fact these alien species, and were part of a long bloodline of these alien species that have been ruling human society for all sorts of, in his ways, nefarious and horrible blood-curdling reasons. And they sort of eat and drink flesh, and it's really rather disturbing. But I mean, I heard of all of that stuff, and I saw some of the stuff on YouTube, and it really is a tremendous leap of faith to start believing what he says. But who am I? I mean, you guys are listening to me, and maybe for many people that's taking a huge leap of faith, and I'm considered to be as much of a crackpot as David Icke. But I put it out there if you're interested. Of course, keep an open mind. I'm not terribly sure where he gets his information from. He has done a fantastical amount of research and has received, of course, a huge amount of abuse. But he's equally upset a lot of people because some of his views have been interpreted as being either anti-Semitic or anti-government or potentially, going to cause public outrage. So he's been banned from so many places. I think he's banned from the Schengen area of Europe. He's banned from Australia. He's been banned from the Netherlands. I think just about anywhere he goes, usually because I think of his comments about Jewish people, who he believes are at the basis of this, the Rockefellers and whoever it might be. He usually gets banned because of what they perceive to be his anti-Semitic views. Now, I'm not going to get into that. It's really never my interest getting involved in making a judgment about the rights or the wrongs of that type of thing. But without doubt, there is a concerted effort by the powers that be to shut him up. Now, it could be, yes, because he's an absolute loony, and you don't really need people like that spouting off what they consider to be hatred and rubbish and stirring people up. But a lot of what he says has got nothing to do with religions and nothing to do with governments. It's all to do with his theories that we are basically in control by a reptilian species. Now, I had obviously heard all of that, but this document came up on my computer, and it wasn't actually the document, it was just a reference to it. And I had to try and search around for it because I couldn't get it through, searching on Google. I eventually did find it through a very obscure website and managed to download it. And I read the whole thing. It took me about two hours to read the whole thing. It's definitely worth talking to you about, which is what I want to devote this episode to. It's been widely claimed to be a complete fabrication. Knowing what I know about David Icke and the various claims that he's made, a lot of it is reasonably similar. But it's anonymous. There is no person who's come forward and said, I was the journalist who met this reptilian Lacerta. And, it's for that reason, nobody can be sure that the Lacerta Files are faked. But nobody can equally be sure that they're real. So I went in with an open mind, and I just read it. It's been translated, I think, from another language, I think from French. So sometimes the English isn't terribly good. And as I said, there are a number of podcasts and websites that have done their best to interpret it. But I was so interested in what I read, I thought I needed to make just one episode. I'm not going to bore you for hours on it, but at least an hour, just to go through what was said and perhaps interject some of my feelings about it. So without further ado, I would ask you to keep an open mind, listen to what has been written. I'm not going to fabricate anything. I'm just going to tell you what is there in front of me, make a few comments. And at the end, I want to talk to you a little bit about what I think about it. And what does that mean? So let's go straight into the document. And it's very, very clear when you start reading this document that this person who actually wrote it down and interviewed Lacerta is a very open and honest person. He's trying to not put his spin on it. He just wants to tell you exactly what happened to him. So at first he talked for over 3 hours with Lacerta, and eventually, after finishing it all, he was asked by Lacerta to sort of edit it and to remove certain things that Lacerta felt that should not be talked about. She didn't allow any photography. She didn't allow him to do anything except make some drawings and to take notes. And he describes Lacerta as being a genuine reptilian-looking female. Lacerta, to almost kind of set the scene, showed him an apple that was on the table, floating above the table by about 40 centimeters in her hands. He also, I think, found that she could move his pencil. And various other things, floating around. What we would perhaps call paranormal abilities, like telepathy and telekinesis, she could do, which was just part of what she claimed was an inherent power in her species that we as humans have lost, but her species has, and other species that she talks about even have way more. I think also Lacerta has the ability to communicate directly into the mind. So she didn't speak, as I believe, to this chap. I think she just communicated directly into his mind. And rather like I did with Titan, I then interpret what that's being said in English, and I think he did exactly the same. So that was fascinating to me, that he's doing almost exactly the same. He's basically channeling the person sitting in front of me, or in front of him. Now, this was in Sweden, actually. It was on April the 23rd, 2000. And I think a lot of promises were made to this chap, Ole K, that after this initial interview, she would come back and say more. And to my knowledge, she never did come back. And that was really the end of that. I made a slight mistake, actually. She promised to come back again in April 2000, but this actual interview took place on December the 16th, 1999. So to start with, he asked this species, alien species, exactly what she is. And she said that she looked partly mammal, but she is not a mammal. She is a female reptile being, and she belonged to a very old reptilian race, and they called themselves Terrans, and they lived on a planet, I suppose, called Terran for millions of years, and for whatever reason they came to Earth eventually, probably for investigation and science. And a little bit like I was feeling in Rendlesham Forest, they were very interested in coming to the surface of the planet and looking around and doing research on us. But in the ancient times, as far back as the Christian Bible and the Egyptians, she alleged that they were seen and known, and they were worshipped as gods. And the Inca and lots of other tribes put in their writings about a species similar to Lacerta. This species that she's a part of is way, way older than the human species, she says. We evolved within a space of 2 or 3 million years, she says. But she drops her first bombshell by saying that actually is impossible by evolutionary standards, because normally evolution takes many, many millions of years, not 2 to 3 millions of years, for a small kind of like a rodent type mammal like we came from to evolve through monkeys and everything else into eventually Homo sapiens. So she's actually making a bit of a bombshell claim and a bit of a laugh that if you call me an extraterrestrial, the answer is no, because she is and her species are native to the Earth and have been here way before us. And in fact, she says the planet is ours and not yours. It was never yours. Now that's quite interesting. And I, as you know, was spoken to by some entity at one point. If you go back and listen to the podcast, you can hear it. And the entity was telling me how there are a number of species that live under the oceans and live under the ground on Earth, and they've been there longer than us. So that's fitting in very much to what I found out from a primary source myself. And I think that gives me a sense that this has got some credibility. But having said that, it's nothing new. This stuff has been written about by all sorts of conspiracy theorists and ufologists for many, many years. But I find it interesting. He asks how old she is, and she says obviously they record time in a different way from us. But if you want to talk about things in terms of human time, she's about 28 years old. He asks her some quite banal questions, like, does she have a job? And none of that is terribly interesting. But she wants to sort of go into the history of the human species. Now, she makes, again, a bomb-like allegation that they have the ability to fly a particular craft, types of UFOs, but they're not alone. There are many other species that have visited and do visit the planet Earth all the time. But equally, there are what we call UFOs flying in the sky that are actually re-engineered versions of alien craft flown by our own governments. Usually you can tell the difference, she said, and she goes into some detail about how you can tell the difference between a reverse-engineered alien craft and the real deal. Usually about humming sounds, certain types of light, the metallic surfaces, and you can usually see from the shape as well whether they're going to be their craft or whether they're going to be another form of craft from another species, or they're going to be perhaps American or other governments' craft. But she says if you do want to see her craft, more likely you won't, because they use a type of cloaking mechanism. But they do fly mainly over their bases, which are, she says, under the Arctic or the Antarctic, or over inner Asia, especially over the mountains there. She talks a little bit about potentially where they come from. I'm not particularly interested in that. If you can read the document yourself, and I will post a link to it if you want to read a bit more about that. she tries to tell the guy that, it's going to be very hard for you because people are going to take what we say and think that you're a crackpot, because humans are very, very suspicious, which is fine. But she says, be prepared for that. But in simple words, she said that, people will deny the existence of a reptilian species, because the human species obviously likes to think, and has thought for the longest point, that they're at the apex of evolution. But it's not true, because essentially we were genetically modified and manufactured by another alien species at about the sort of same time as these reptilians were, or these Terrans were around on Earth anyway. A little bit more about that later. But she describes the way she looks. She has 2 arms, she has a head, she has 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 feet. The proportions of her body are very similar to human. She's female, so she does have 2 breasts. And despite the fact that she comes originally as a reptile, they started off as reptiles and then perhaps evolved more from dinosaurs than they did from anything else, they started to give milk to their babies in the evolutionary process about 30 million years ago, because they found that it was the best thing to keep the young alive. And this obviously was something that happened with us as humans as well. They basically don't lay eggs. They actually gestate an egg inside them, which is then when the young is ready to be born, the egg then comes out, and then promptly the child inside the egg uses their hands with 2 kind of little horn things on the edge of their fingers to break that shell and to come out. So they've kind of evolved from just having an egg that matures in the open for a while to an egg that matures within the body of the reptilian and comes out ready for birth, but within still an egg. It's very interesting. They have round ears. They're smaller and less curved than ours. They can hear much better than us because they're much more sensitive to sound, and they can hear a wider range of sound. They have a kind of a muscle or a lid over their ears which can completely close, for instance, underwater. They have a V-shaped nose. They have larger lips, and the females have larger than the males. They're a pale brown color, and they have very white and strong teeth. They're a bit longer than ours, and they're obviously designed for tearing flesh. They have a different sort of hair color to us. It depends on their age, a bit like us, but they do have some hair, mainly only on their head. They have very strong arms, very strong legs, and they have a very strong body. Their shape is similar to ours, but they have a different green-beige color. They have scale-like structures on the upper legs, over the knees and the upper arms. They have 5 fingers, a bit longer and thinner than ours, and they have various other scale-like skin structures on their body with brown dots. And these brown dots are almost like fingerprints, because the way that they're arranged are very unique to each particular Terran. They have extremely sensitive skin. It's very smooth, and they also have particular organs on the back of their bodies, which is very touch centimeters. Only 3 centimeters long and very touch sensitive. That's the reason why she says they have problems sitting in human chairs. And when they get warm in the sun or in artificially lit areas that they have underground, they become very blood-filled, and it gives them a tremendous feeling of pleasure. They don't have a navel because they don't have a mammalian birth. Apart from that, they generally don't wear human clothing. They wear very wide gowns, but they tend to wear human clothing if they are on the surface of the Earth, which, from what I've read, they don't do very often, in fact. They feel very at home in their artificial sun areas, as they can usually be completely naked as well. Yes, so they have families as well. They have the same sort of bonds as us, although um, because their names are very complicated, the way you say the name is more important than the actual spelling of the name. So the way it's pronounced gives an absolute unique ability for people in her race to know who is who and what family they belong to. Usually families contain about 40 to 70 individuals. There are a number of these underground bases throughout the world, some very big, some a bit smaller. And when you're talking big, I think they are, a couple of 100 kilometers wide, and some of them slightly small. So the young are not so large as our babies when they're born. They're about 30 to 35 centimeters. But they are a reptilian in the fact that they don't have the same body temperature as us, and they can live without the sun, but they do like to sit there. Their normal body temperature is about 30 to 33 degrees. I think ours is about 37, 38 degrees. It's very important for them to get warm because they produce certain enzymes and hormones, which is very, very good for them. So it is very popular amongst their species to be in a warm room with warm artificial light, or even to be on the surface of the earth. They don't eat the same sort of food as us. They don't mind fruit and vegetables, but they do need meat. I presume that's because they are originally reptiles. So it's very important. And some of the food that we eat is poisonous to us, and vice versa. They can't live completely vegetarian like humans because of their digestive system. Some of their species prefer cooked meat, others prefer raw meat. And they obviously do manage to produce that animals to eat underground, as well as maybe they run around catching animals on the surface. It's not really very clear. But they're an ancient species. They are 65 million years old. And they are, ancestors of a dinosaur race that died in what she called a global cataclysm. This cataclysm is interesting because, I've been talking about that, and that there was a global cataclysm that seemed to be on the horizon. Thank God it hasn't happened yet, and maybe we've averted it for a while. But that cataclysm, she says, was not caused by this asteroid that has been described by our scientists. This was over 65 million years ago. And apparently at that time, there were two very advanced alien species, which she can't name because we wouldn't understand the pronunciation. We wouldn't be able to get it. But one race was very humanoid like us, and was from this universe, from a solar system in a constellation we call Procyon. And the other species, which she says they don't actually know too much about, was a reptilian species, but they had nothing to do with the Terran species that she's a member of. And because she evolved from, and her species evolved from local dinosaurs or Saurians, they were very successful at being able to manipulate their own genes, and they became a very successful advanced reptilian species. But the other species that didn't come from this universe at all. They came from a completely different universe, and maybe even a different dimension. Now, there was a bit of a problem here because this advanced species was able to, as she describes it, walk between bubbles, or walk between dimensions using quantum technology, she describes. So they were most definitely not interstellar, they were interdimensional beings. And about 150 years before the reptilians came, they built some colonies, and they lived on what we now called Antarctica. And they lived together with Saurians on the planet with no problems. So these two alien species basically lived together, and they tried to communicate peacefully, but they weren't successful in the end, because eventually a global war erupted between the early Saurians, which her family comes from, and this advanced species. Saurians. And this was all about Earth's raw materials, particularly copper. They found copper was a very important element because of its ability to combine with radiation and magnetism in a particular device, being able to produce various specialized other elements that are very, very vital in various technological tasks that these species needed to do. Maybe that was to do with travel, time travel, or whatever else. And planet Earth, for some reason, is quite unique in in its ability to have an awful lot of copper. So this big battle was taking place because of Earth's natural resources. And in the end, what happened was that there was a bomb that was fired from space by this alien species that was going to be trying to get rid of her early ancestors. But this bomb, which was a kind of fusion bomb, ended up causing a hell of a lot more problems than they anticipated. It was designed not to destroy the planet and would not interfere with their interest in mining the resources, but it would kill off most life that was living on the surface. The radiation apparently went wrong because it detonated over what we would call, I suppose, the Gulf of Mexico. Or the Gulf of America, if you want, what Donald Trump wants. And the interaction between this bomb and the water created all sorts of radioactive isotopes that were way, way worse. And it killed off anything living, including the dinosaurs. The only things that really survived over the next 20 years were things in the oceans, and various other things survived even more than 20 years, maybe 200 to 300 years after this. But even these species started to die out because the climate changed and a sort of nuclear winter came. But that ended after about 200 years, and various reptiles like crocodiles and various advanced dinosaurs which had developed in the last stage with the animal reptiles, some of them survived. And a new reptile ended up walking up on two legs and looked a little bit like a reconstruction of an iguanodon, and it originated apparently from this family. But it was much smaller, about 1.5 meters tall, with sort of humanoid features. That was the direct ancestor of Lacerta. And, they've done their own history research, and they believe that their ancestors developed over 30 million years into a highly evolved species that they are now. And they evolved into an extremely intelligent species and are considerably more advanced than Homo sapiens by now, with very advanced technologies and also enhanced extrasensory perceptions and abilities to do things such as controlling minds or communicating through telepathy and able to move things through their minds. They're able to cloak themselves as well, so you can't actually see their real features. And they're able to convince your mind that you're actually seeing a human, for instance, which is why they can walk amongst us and not be seen. So this alien species, the Terrans, about 10 million years ago, continued the evolution of their species, but mainly also through their own ability to use genetic engineering. So they probably sort of super-engineered their species. And this was the same time as apparently we as Homo sapiens were sort of almost small monkey-like creatures in the trees. And they managed to manipulate their own genes, while ours were still very much similar to those of the other animals around us. But 10 billion years ago, the small little monkeys that became us, they started to grow and come down from the trees to the ground, mainly because of climate change and the so-called things that were going on at the time in the African continent. But they evolved extremely slowly, as is normal for evolution. It really took for things to happen in a very, very different way. Normally, species like that can take, 50 million years to evolve into a human. But suddenly, for the reasons she decides to describe, we were actually ended up being part of some sort of intergalactic zoo. She actually calls it the 6th and 7th creation period. And it was something that apparently is in the Bible. I can't say that I've actually heard about that. Maybe that was the original creation of the biblical stories. But in terms of this cataclysm and everything that evolved out of that cataclysm, the big, obviously, difference is that they stopped really evolving 10 million years ago in any significant way before we evolved into what we are. So what ended up happening was that another species came to this planet, and they were very, very interested in the proto-human race, because they were very similar in many respects to the evolution of this other race called the Procyon. And they decided to actually influence what became human species through our re-encoding and decoding of DNA. And they basically manufactured us into what we've now become. Now, the current theory, she says, that both of these early humanoid species that were on Earth from another planet had died out, and others came back perhaps many, many, many years later, and then sort of picked up from where they were. But the thought was that they were actually engineering the human species to be some form of slave labor for them, to enable them to mine the copper that was extremely important as an element, and is still extremely important as an element to these alien species. And maybe it is to us if we've been using their technology. I don't really know. So yes, the early human species that was being re-engineered lived in caves, and essentially they started developing also extremely quickly because our DNA was being manipulated. So yes, as the human species was developing and sort of colonizing the surface of the planet, the Terrans obviously decided that they would keep out of the way. And they found it probably safer because I suppose they'd managed to hide from this great big cataclysm in certain respects, or their ancestors had, within the Earth. They kept on living pretty much beneath the surface of the Earth in great big near-surface caverns. And they had various entries into our world located throughout the world. And obviously, the interviewer here does actually ask Lacerta where these entrances are, and she refuses to divulge that, although there is apparently one about 300 kilometers north of where this particular interview was given in Sweden, near a large lake, she says. But she said you'll never be able to find it, because, and if you do, she says, as a little advice, keep away, because you'll find something that may look like an artificial mine shaft, and it's much deeper as you go, and the walls appear more smoother than perhaps normal mine shafts, and you might feel unusual warm air streaming from the depth, which is their ventilation systems. You might even find an elevator shaft, because they have a very special type of elevator that enables them to go up and down. And there's usually a door made from a sort of a grey metal that if you were to open that, you would usually get into a round technical room with the ventilation systems and the elevators to the depths. And that is probably the entry to their world. But if you've reached that point, they said, they would be definitely aware of our presence and we'd be in big trouble. She doesn't sort of, thank God, go into the detail of what sort of trouble that would be. But it will be an entry to the huge tunnel systems that operate not just from their race, but from all sorts of other alien races, including hostile alien races that exist in our world. and it's really very much more prudent for us to keep away, because as humans we're really not welcome down there, and it could cause us all sorts of problems. I presume they'd kill you. I don't really actually know. But she talks about these entrances and these exits that exist all over the world, where the people who live down there can actually come and visit us. She also talks about some species, or some of her species, are also in direct contact with human scientists and politicians, but it's top secret, as we would call it. And nobody from the public really knows about it, apart from obviously the conspiracy theorists and people who listen to this podcast. But she talks rather glumly about an upcoming war between alien species and her species, and also will be in the middle of it as well. Again, this always seems to be because of who's going to own the ability to mine the resources of this planet, and we as people are just in the way. And it's a much more significant threat to the other alien species because they're so much more evolved than us, apparently. So yes, she talks again a lot about how she can actually talk to people through their mind. They have a much larger brain than us. It has slightly different structures that have evolved and are there, that are part of the ability to influence physical things through the mind and also to communicate through the mind. They're able to, as I said earlier, cloak themselves so they can actually make themselves look human if they need to, so they can walk around. We can't tell. We'd never be able to tell. Our brains are, our abilities are far too simple for us to be able to beat the power of their mind control. And some of these abilities are so strong, it could even kill you if they wanted to, but they're forbidden to do that. And their race has this ability, but she says that other races out there have even stronger abilities that you just couldn't countermand. You could potentially, through very advanced mind control of your own, resist this this sense of having to be served, or having to serve a reptilian species through your mind. But other species, you wouldn't be able to resist. It would be just too strong, and you just wouldn't know anything about it. And that kind of reminded me of people who've been abducted, allegedly by aliens. They talk about having absolutely no control over their mind, being completely taken over and being turned basically into slaves. So that's all a bit interesting and depressing. She talks about how their species, obviously growing up as so much more advanced, and another species called the Elohim, who came from this universe, have been worshipped as gods through the history of mankind because of their advanced nature and the way that they look. The Elohim had managed to enhance their brains so significantly that they managed to also, they were the ones who were actually involved in our manipulation. And they've returned, every few thousands of years to come and accelerate our evolution, as if we're some sort of almost laboratory animals that they're just playing around with. They started even developing our ability to speak and to use technology, and it was very much them that basically we owe our origin to. They, by the sound of it, were pretty benign, apart from the fact that they were obviously designing us perhaps to be slaves. They did come around and visit the ancient Egyptians, who obviously assisted them to build the pyramids and various other things that we just now think, how on earth did they do it? Well, they didn't do it according to this. They were using all sorts of technology which was way beyond their own civilization to be able to cut stone and to manipulate things in a mind control sort of way, or in abilities to get things done through their minds. They provided a huge amount of the technological assistance that helped civilizations develop. So they were really responsible for our evolution. And yeah, really from that time to now, we don't really have any knowledge about our real origin, about our real past. We just think, because our scientists have tried to interpret it according to their abilities, that we came through an order of evolution as laid down by people like Darwin. But it's obviously completely different from that. And, it does make some sort of sense, because I've heard many times people talking about the theory of evolution just doesn't seem to fit. It seems almost impossible that we could have come in a way directly from apes, as has been described, and also in such a short space of time. It's as if there are quite a few missing links between our evolution and the fossil record. And she talks a little bit about that so many of the species that have existed that are way more advanced than us, and even to a certain extent more advanced than they, have lived on this earth. But the records are just gone because of either the wars that have taken place, or that they're buried so deep down in the ground we can't find them. Or more importantly, if we do find sort of fossilized remains, because of the way our science works, we've put together these fossils in the wrong way, and we've actually created animals that we call ancient animals that suit what our feeling is they would look like. And that's fit in with our idea that they would be lizard-looking animals, or there would be particular types of saurians, when really if they've actually been like a jigsaw puzzle that's been done wrong. And talks about, I think, one particular scientist who did actually manage to get the bones roughly right. But even these scientists used bones from other living animals now, and put them into the fossil bit to try to make it up to look like an animal it was almost a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. If they wanted the animal to look a particular way because that's what they assumed they would look like, they used the fossils they could find, and other animal bones, maybe some human bones, I don't know, to fill in the blanks, and of course ended up producing completely wrong animals that were not there. And so we've kind of missed the clues for these ancient saurians, these highly evolved animals, because we haven't put those tiny little fragments that we found back in the right way. But throughout the time period, this has all been going on. At least 14 different species have been active on Earth, and many of them are still active on Earth, she says, right now. And many of them have abilities. In fact, most of them have abilities way beyond our own, but don't particularly feel threatened by us, and they don't particularly need to interfere with us because they are living along happily, doing their own thing. Now, this also makes me feel, why then are they suddenly making themselves far more apparent in the last sort of 50, 60, 70 years? And I think it's probably, again, as it's been indicated to me before, that they are only interested now because we are evolving using weaponry like the nuclear bomb or whatever else that potentially could destroy the Earth. Now, by destroying the Earth, you're going to potentially destroy them, and they're not going to have that because the Earth is not ours. It's a bit like children being able to play with fire, and they need to stop these children from playing with fire because otherwise they could burn the house down. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I can see how that could be so important. So Lacerta talks about highly evolved species, that the interdimensional ones that have come through, and they've been able to destroy us and everything on this planet before, and they're obviously out there still. They are incredibly highly evolved. They have a very different sort of social system to us. They could actually just create us and then destroy us again and create something new if they wanted to. They obviously have their own agenda, and I think even Lacerta isn't actually terribly sure quite what that agenda is. But they come with their own teachings, they have their own mind control, they have their own agenda. They have the ability to use very advanced weapon systems if they want to. They can cause earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, natural disasters. And apparently Lacerta fears that there will be another really hot war in the next few years, but she doesn't want to talk further about it, which is interesting. But she is actually saying, please open your eyes and see this. Don't believe in the wrong history of your scientists and what your politicians are telling you. Some of them, she says, know the truth about various things, but they don't inform the public. So to not confuse everyone and to panic everyone. And she thinks that, our species is not as bad as some of her kind thinks we are. And it would be a pity for her to see the end of our species. So she, again, keeps asking us to open our eyes, stop being so ignorant, become aware of what is out there, allow, I suppose, in a way, this disclosure so that we do actually see that we're not alone and that we are part of something greater. And just because we're part of it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a secret anymore. And maybe our best future is through the security of working with some of the other species that call Earth their home, and some more than us, in order to avoid this potential problem from these interdimensional species that apparently are not quite so nice, that potentially will come back and cause troubles for us. So that is Lacerta File 1. Lacerta File 2, I will do in a separate podcast. I won't be doing it today. Probably I'll do that tomorrow to try to get it out, because this is already an hour, and I know we all have a limit to what we can listen to. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to continuing with the second file and the final file tomorrow.